pamphlet before printing. So who was doing, you know, I must admit this is there I'm not so familiar with. There were people who were specifically would recopy, that they would recopy a manuscript, like literally by hand, I assume.
I'll tell you soon, but Moshe, there's background noise. Oh, by Avram, there's background noise somewhere, so I don't know where it's coming from, but please mute it. Basically, the Alter Rebbe Chassidim got wind of the writings of Tanya, and they wanted to study it. So they made copies. The Alter Rebbe had written for 20 years his Tanya, but he never publicized it. So they they asked him, "Could you give us some of the information?" He said, "Yes." And that's how. And then each one made copies and copies and copies and copies. So
By hand, I mean recopy.
yeah. There was no photocopy machines by hand, of course.
Obviously, of course. But
Yeah.
Okay.
And sometimes, as we'll learn today, in the next approbation, it's a genuine mistake. But when it's a deliberate forgery, it's a whole different issue. And that's when the Alter Rebbe, he noticed, and people, and his Hasidim told him that they're troublemakers here, trying to get you into trouble, trying to get us into trouble, and trying to make us look bad, and to support their issue, their antagonism. I didn't mention yesterday, but I reminded myself it's worth mentioning. In 1896, excuse me, what got the Alter Rebbe, why the Alter Rebbe agreed to publish the Tanya as a book.
1796.
1796, thank you, was because the Sefer Tzivos Harivosh, the instructions of the Baal Shem Tov, was burned. Yesterday I told you in 1880, 81, 82, the first printed book of Hasidus told us Yaakov Yosef was burned. But in 1796, they burned the Tzivos Harivosh. The Alter Rebbe said, that's it. Now I have to go public. When my Rebbe's Torah is being burnt in the streets, that's it. So that happened in 1796. Okay, let's now turn to page Gimel of the Haskamas, the approbations. Now, you must know that this Haskama, this approbation, which is from the three sons of the Alter Rebbe, Reb Dov Ber, Reb Chaim Avram, and Reb Moshe, as you'll see towards the end, was not printed in the 1796 Tanya. It was only printed in the 1814 Tanya that was printed in the city of Shklov. That was already after the Alter Rebbe passed away in 1812. And it is at that time when they reprinted the Tanya in 1814, 2 years after his passing, by his sons, that they added the fourth section of Tanya called the Geras HaKodesh, letters of holy letters, and the fifth section, some say it's the fifth section, some call it a part of the fourth section, whatever. It's called Kuntris Achron, the last pamphlet. Those two were not included in the edition of 1796. So what you had, David, in the first edition was only the first part, Lekuti Amorim, 2, Shari Yichud Ve'emunah, and 3, Igeres HaTshuva. The Alter Rebbe had written letters throughout his lifetime, both to inspire people to give tzedakah, particularly to the people in Eretz Yisrael, and to his organization called Koilel Chabad, which still exists today, to support the poor people of Eretz Yisrael and their institutions, and also written letters of inspiration, people to serve Hashem better, with love and all for God. The children felt that this is very important as the time went on, and the Alter Rebbe already passed away, and here they are, leading the Chabad flock, in particular the Mittler Rebbe, the oldest son of Dov Ber. So they decided we're going to add a set of letters that deal with these topics that I enumerated, and also clarification of issues that the Alter Rebbe wrote about in Likutei Amarim, the first section, that he himself wrote, how they coincide with statements in the Zohar HaKadosh and in the Kisvi Arizal and in the Eitz Chaim. Very Kabbalistic, as you all know from saying Chitas, that that part of our learning Chitas is difficult. It's a lot of Kabbalah. But the Alter Rebbe wrote, to be honest to himself, to explain how there's no contradiction. So the sons fell, but he didn't print it. He didn't print it in the first time. The Tanya was printed in 1796. Now, I don't know if he didn't print that last part because he hadn't finished it, or he felt it's not relevant to the average person. I don't know. But he didn't print it. But the sons in 1814 felt now is the time to print that as well. And this haskama, this last third approbation, is about that. Okay? So don't confuse the previous two haskamas of the two students of the Maggid, Reb Zusha Anapoli and Reb Yehuda Leiba Cohen, with the one we're learning today, which is the haskamas, the approbations of his sons. Clear? Before we begin inside, any questions? Okay. Haskamas, let's learn the text. Haskamas harabanim, the approbations of the rabbis, sheyichir, may they live, b'nei hagoyin ha'mechaber, children of the Gaon, of the genius, the author, zechreinu lavrocha, may be remembered for blessing Nishmas Eden, his soul is in Eden. So again, over here, in this title, it doesn't say who is the author, right? And this coincides, meanwhile, with what I told you yesterday. The Alter Rebbe does not mention his name on the title page, nor is his name mentioned in the two approbations of his two older friends, Reb Zusha and Reb Yehuda Leib, because of his great modesty. Let's read now what the approbation itself. The brothers write, since we all agree, to give permission and authorization to place on the printing press for an everlasting and eternal memory for Jews, for the children of Israel, Kosov divrei yosher ve'emes, writing of proper writing and truth writing, divrei elikim, words of God, Chayim, the living God. This is a reference to Chassidus, right? Dalit divrei Elokim Chayim. I want you all to write this down or to memorize it. Is an acronym for Dach, Dalit, Elokim Aleph, Chayim Ches. Dach, so we spell it Dalit Aleph, two dittos, Ches. It's an acronym for Divrei Elokim Chayim, the words of the living God. And what does it refer to? Hasidus. It refers also, you could say, to Kabbalah. In other words, the study of truth. Now, what does that mean? The Talmud's not true. The Halacha's not true. God forbid, everything's true. But the purity that's in Kabbalah and Hasidus doesn't lend itself to questions and answers and argumentation. You don't have that. So in a sense, it's more forthright and pure. Hence, it's called Divrei Elokim Chayim. And I'm not sure, but I don't think that you really find this term in most other Hasidic writings. Hillel, have you ever come across in the Slonimer's writing that's Divrei Elokim Chayim?
I'm not sure.
Not sure. I don't think so. I mean,
I don't recall offhand.
right. I don't think anyone recalls in any other Hasidic writings Divrei Elokim Chayim, Dach. Anyway, in Chabad, it's a common phrase used to refer to the study of Hasidus. Moshe, you had a question?
Where are we now?
We're on page Gimel, the third Haskama, the third line. The
How does that house come up again?
Harabonim sheyichye b'nei hagoyin ha'mechaber. Okay, so they say the words of truth of Chassidus shall Avi Adinenu Avi Mori v'Rabbi Moreinu v'Rabbeinu, our Rebbe, our father Zechreinu Levacha, Ksuvim b'Ksav Yodoi Hakdosha, were written with his own holy handwriting. He wrote the manuscript. Biyatzmai, himself. Uleshonei HaKodesh, and it's his holy language, it's his. Shekol Dvarav, all of his words, Kegachlei Eish, are like burning coals. Boyeres, burning coals. Yalhivu, they flame. Halavavis, they inflame the hearts. His words make the hearts flame. L'karva lavia shebeshmayim, to bring Yidden closer to their Father in heaven. So they say the three children who write this approbation were referring specifically not to his Tanya and the three first section, but we're referring here, which of course that's true, but we're referring to the 1814 edition of Igros HaKodesh, Igeres HaKodesh, holy letters. Nikru, we call them Igeres HaKodesh. In other words, who gave the name to the fourth section of Tanya? It seems like the three children decided this is the name because they're letters of their father and they believe they're holy, i.e. Igeres HaKodesh. Sherubim hoyu Igeres shiluach be'ez kvet kedushas. Most of them, the majority of them, are letters that were sent from our father, the Rebbe, the Holy One, Lahoyris la'am Hashem, to instruct the nation of God, haderech, the way, yehuba, that Jews should conduct themselves and walk in, v'hamaise asher yasun, and the way they should behave. And here, the Chabad Masayid is that the haderech refers to the Ava and Yira within the letters. Remember I told you earlier, the letters of Igeres HaKodesh, there are two kinds. You can sum up as two kinds. Some are letters of inspiration in Avodas Hashem, to grow your Ava, your love for God, and your awe for God. So the word derech would refer to that, and the word maiseh, hamaiseh, after the word vaderech yelchuba, that refers to tzedakah. Tzedakah. A lot of letters in here about tzedakah. That's action. Give tzedakah. Support Kaila Chabad. Give the poor people of Eretz Yisrael. How you should give it, when you should give it, why you should give it, and all of those things that we will see in the Igeres HaKodesh. Machbas shebekaba mikoimus heitziv boitziyonim b'sefer lekuti amorim, and since in many places in Igeres HaKodesh there are references to what the Alter Rebbe wrote in Lekuti Amorim in the first section of Tanya, Shaloi, v'divri Torah aniyim b'mokem echad v'ashirim b'mokem achad. There is a Gemara. It's a famous phrase. The words of Torah are poor in one place and rich in another place. In other words, Moshe, sometimes the Gemara will discuss something very briefly. And then in another tractate, the same idea will be discussed at great length. So when it's discussed very briefly, David, it's called aniyim, poor. It's not elaborate, Yonason. When it's discussed at length, so elsewhere in the Talmud, we call it ashirim, wealthy. So the children of the Alter Rebbe here in this approbation are citing that phrase regarding their father's writing. Sometimes our father was brief in explaining a concept in the Lekuti Amorim, but he elaborated on it in in another writings, which we call Kuntras Achen, which we could say is the 5th section of Tanya. And that's why they're saying we've included it here in the 1814 edition. Because there are some places in Tanya and in Geras HaKodesh where our father refers to Likutei Amorim, and he doesn't say what. So therefore, we need to open it up and elaborate, and that's in Kuntras Achen. That's what he says right over here. Then he says, not only is there in this last section clarification of earlier points that were said, written, briefly, but also there's a chidush, there's a novelty in Kuntras Achen. There's some ideas that are totally new. In other words, not only is it clarification, but it's a novelty, and therefore it's worth printing and learning and studying. We've made a Kuntras Achen, a kind of a last pamphlet, a latter pamphlet, Al Eze Prokim, on some of the chapters of Tanya, chapter 1. Asher Kosav Be'ez Chiburai, that he wrote while he compiled HaSefer Likutei Amorim. So I take back what I said earlier. What the sons are saying here is that the Alter Rebbe wrote the Kuntras Achen while he was composing his Tanya for 20 years. That's what it says here. But for some reason he didn't publish it. So we are not going to publish it. You see what it says here, Moshe? It says here that look what it says. Asher kosav be'ez chiburoi hasefer Likutei Amorim. He wrote these, and what are they? Pilpul v'iyun omuk, deep dissertation, deep analysis. Al maimer hazoyer v'etz chayim u'pri etz chayim. Deep pilpul. Analysis of sections of the Zohar and the Kabbalah called Sefer called Svarim called Eitz Chaim and Upri Eitz Chaim. Shenirim Kisoisim Zeh. They seem to contradict some of the things that he wrote in the Likutei Amorim. Uveruach mivinosoi, and with the spirit of his deep understanding, miyashvam kol dibur alifanov. He resolves everything he said, each in its place. He compartmentalizes it, he explains it, and he says it's not a contradiction, this refers to this refers to this, etc., etc. And therefore, we're including it in the 1814 edition of the reprinting of the Tanya. Okay? Shekosav Likutei Amorim, therefore, we see fit, it's proper lechabram to attach, to print as an attachment Geras HaKodesh and Kuntras Achen in Sefer Likutei Amorim v'Geras HaTshuva shel Kvei Kedushas Avi Adoni Meir Rabbi Zal. To attach to the first section called Likutei Amorim and Geras HaTshuva. Come on, I'm waiting for a question. Yes, Yonis. Yonis, you're on mute. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't really have a question. It's just that do you remember one occasion of what the contradiction was, or not?
I remember the first one about what the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 40 in Tanya, that through tefillah, your tefillah soar on high. That issue. And over there he brings a contradiction that says elsewhere it's through Torah. So is it through tefillah or through Torah? I think that's the first part of Kuntras Achen. But the question I'm waiting for, Chevra, it should be obvious How many sections did the 1796 version of the Tanya the first time have? 3. And over here he says only 2. It had Likuti Amarim, Shara Yichud Ve'emuna, and Igeres HaTshuva. Or maybe it didn't, but I thought it did. Okay? So I need to investigate that. But you understand? He says here, we are reprinting the Tanya to the previous existing publication, which had Likuti Amorim and Igeres HaTshuva. What about Shara Yichud Ve'emuna?
Yeah, he hasn't spoken about that in this Haskama at all.
But he hasn't spoken about Igeres HaTshuva either. But the fact is, I don't know, I think the fact is that in the first printing of 1796, it had 3 sections. The 3 that we have. And the second one being Shara Yichud Ve'emuna. But here he doesn't say that. So I just bring it to your attention, and I'll snoop around, or if you see anything, let me know. Let's continue.
Rabbi Dalton.
Yes.
Dalton is we're talking about Shara Yichud Ve'emuna. Aren't there some who say that Chinuch Katan is also maybe like a separate section? Are there those that say that?
Yeah, of course it's a separate section. If it's a separate section, the question is only stronger. Why doesn't he mention it? If you tell me it's not a separate section, okay, but as far as I know, and as far as you just said it yourself, it's a separate section. It's called Shara Yichud Ve'emuna. Let's go on.
No.
What?
Yeah, okay.
What? I didn't.
No, you answered. Yeah.
Okay.
You answered. Thank you.
Ilazois, you're welcome. Ilazois, Bonu, let's continue inside. Bonu lahatil gudarabba. Nevertheless, we, the children, come to place a great fence. Gudarabba means a great fence. The Gzeiras Nachosh, and a decree of a snake, the Rabbanan of the rabbis. What does that mean? It's a snake, but it's a snake that has an acronym. Nun, Ches, Shin. Nun, it's 3 forms of excommunication, halachic excommunications. Nidui, Cherem, Shamta. Okay? It's 3 variations of excommunication. And they're so tough and powerful that we don't wish to use them, and because their bite is the bite of a snake. So their acronym happens to... What?
What's the third one?
Shamto. So their bite is as powerful as a snake, hence the acronym becomes Nachosh. So the children are saying, we are warning everyone. And basically, if you're going to pretty much, copy the Tanya without permission, we place this rabbinic excommunication on you. You have no rishus to do it. So, be warned. Don't do that. The Leslie asvasa shelayorim ish. No one has permission to lift their hands. Es yodai, his hand. Lahatvis kitavnisam, to print in the form that you find it, or even the different forms. Hands off. The copyright is not yours. You have no permission, whether you print one section only or this one before this one. Don't play around with it. You're dealing with fire. That's what they're saying, basically. Again, like we learned yesterday in the first approbation from the 2 students of the Maggid, Meshech Chabisha Shani. For 5 years, Miyoim de Lamata, from the day that we will sign below. Stop. However, Kagoin dot Tzorach Loidia, we must notify everyone. Shababaminaseinu harabim, due to our transgressions, due to the transgressions of the public. He's referring to the ones, the Misnagdim, who went and copied and forged. Sofu sabu kisve yodei hakadoisha bi'atzmai. They put an end to his holy writing that he wrote himself. Asher hoya bediktu gadol, that was very, very punctual. Lechoser v'layotir ois aleph, not an extra or missing even an aleph. V'lenishir kiyim zeh hamaat be'arbe asher nilkutu echod le'echod. The only thing that was what remained was, okay, very few of the copies. Let me explain. Remember, before the 1796 Tanya was printed, no, sorry, after the 1796 Tanya was printed, they sold out. So what did people do? They again copied. So the children are saying, we have to reprint because we don't have any more, we have very few copies left. And to rely on copyists, which sometimes involves forgery, we can't do that. So they're giving justification why they're reprinting. That's what they're doing over here. That's what he says. There's Zehama'at Meharbe. Out of all the copies of the Tanya that was printed, fewer are left. And there have been Nilkutu Echad Lechad, we've gathered one here, there, from the copies that were scattered by the students of Tanya. And he says, and if you will find and if you find any mistakes, who can understand? So he says, you should know that the context will verify the truthfulness of what's written, even though you might find a copy mistake. Let me just finish and I'll explain. And therefore, even if you find a printing mistake, the kavanah, the intent of what's being discussed, will be clear and clarified. So, even in the printing, there were mistakes. And it wasn't only till the Tanya of 1900 that the fifth Rebbe of Sholem Ber of Lubavitch asked a famous chassid, Reb Osher of Nikolaev, Reb Osher Grossman, to come from Nikolaev to Lubavitch and spend time there going over every word in Tanya, comparing it to previous manuscripts, and to give out a new, cleaner version. And there's a big story about that, because this was at a time when the Rebbe Rashab's cousins were players as well. And the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe, wanted their consent. Now you understand that Tzemach Tzedek had 7 sons, 6 remained living. Because of that, there was, in Hayyim Yom it says, 50,000, 100,000 Chassidim. Russia and Ukraine was full of Lubavitch Chassidim. It doesn't mean everyone was wearing, saying chitas, okay? But they came from Chabad. And the sons of the Tzemach Tzedek and their sons promulgated and publicized Chabad Chassidus in the entire region. More than any other group, and that's a fact on the ground, and it's not because I'm Lubavitcher. That is a fact, a historical fact, that academics agree as well, if we need their agreement. Okay? No. Here you have cousins of the Rebbe Rashab, who had their version of Chabad, right? One said it in Ladi, one said it in Nezhin, one said it in Kapust, one said it in Navruch, and one said it in Lubavitch. 5. And here, the one from Lubavitch, the successor to the Rebbe Marash, who passed away in 1882, the Rashab, he decides in 1900 he wants to give out a Tanya that has less mistakes. Well, wouldn't you think that he should get permission and work together with his cousins? And the answer is yes. But he led the charge. And he knew that if he pushed Lubavitch, including printing that in the cover page, they would not accept it. You know what he did? He told the printers to leave it out. He didn't want to start machlokes. And he wanted them to, let me finish, please. He wanted, a moment, Moshe. He wanted them, yes, Moshe.
I'm sorry, to leave what out? I'm sorry, I lost you.
To leave out that this is printed by Toim Chetmim in Lubavitch, the yeshiva of Lubavitch. There's Chabad and Lubavitch. Chabad were 4 out of the 5 children of the Tzemach Tzedek. They were Chabad Rebbes. The only one that remained, what was called Lubavitcher Rebbe, was the 4th, was the youngest, Reb Shmuel, the Marash. And why? Because he stayed in Lubavitch. The others moved out. But not only that, each one created their own shul and their own supporters. So when it came time to print the Sefer of Tanya, which is the universal Sefer for Chabad Hasidim, you know, who says you have a right to print it? We're all kids and grandkids of the Tzemach Tzedek. And the Rebbe Rashab was sensitive to this, and he worked very hard. And there's letters, you can in his letters, you can read them. He worked very hard to keep the peace, and he succeeded. And it's a very important lesson for us. Family, children, wills, inheritance. Make peace. Work it out. Even if you're the kingpin, even if your father or mother left you as the what do they call them? The
Executor.
Executor, thank you. Remember, you have siblings. Remember that. And don't, work it in a way that they feel good. It's very important. Anyway, I don't go into that now. It's just an aside. It's an aside. But you see from this. So why am I telling you this? Because here the children of the Tzemach of the Rebbe is saying that what's it called? Even if there are mistakes, know that the content will prove that the Alter Rebbe's point is correct. I'm just telling you that's in 1814, 1900. It was only in 1900 that a new Tanya that was also not perfect, but much better, with less mistakes, was printed. And the Rebbe, our Rebbe, has in the back of these Tanyas that are printed today a tikkun toys, correcting still mistakes in certain areas. Okay? That's what we're referring to. I want to just conclude with the next the names, because it's something very interesting. Now, who signs this? Neum, so says the oldest son, Dov Ber. He became the next Rebbe, right? Ben Avi Adoini Meire V'Rabbi, Hagoyin HaChosid, the Goyin HaChosid, Kodesh Yisrael, the Holy One, Meire Rabbeinu Shneir Zalman. Oh, so here he writes for the first time the name, Shneir Zalman, the Alter Rebbe's name. Next one, Neum Chaim Avram, Ben Adoini Avi, Meire Rabbi, Hagoyin HaChosid, Morona V'Rabbanon, the Rabbi, Shneir Zalman. And finally, the third son, Moshe, Ben Rabbi Hagoyin HaChosid Shneir Zalman. It's obvious, each one chooses a different title. Look at the first one. Kodesh Yisrael. After Hagoyin HaChosid, each one says the genius, the Chosid, but the Mittler Rebbe addresses his father as Kodesh Yisrael, the Holy One of Israel. You don't have that in the second one. And you don't have it in the third one. Now go to the second one, Chaim Avram. Hagoyin HaChosid, Merona V'Rabbanon, the master and rabbi. You don't have that in the first and the third. And then go to the third one, Moshe. He only says Hagoyin
You
HaChassid.
do have that in the first. You do have that in the first one.
Right, but you don't have, thank you. But you don't have Kodesh Yisrael. Then you go to the third one, Reb Moshe, and it says only Hagoyin HaChassid. I remember when I read this the first time, I said, why the change, you know? The Rebbe once addressed it. And the Rebbe said, possibly. Each one spoke, each one signed where he was holding at that time. Right, it's 1814. They're writing an approbation for the new edition of the Tanya. So each one is somewhere in their life. Right? Right? When you guys were in America, that's it, David was a dentist. Whether he'll be a dentist in Eretz Yisrael is to be seen, right? But if he's writing when he's a dentist, he's going to sign with his, you know, either DDS, whatever you call it, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So let's look at it. The Mittler Rebbe in 1814 already became the new Lubavitcher Rebbe because the Alter Rebbe passed away in 1812. So he addresses his father not only as a genius, a chassid, Kodesh Yisrael. Kodesh Yisrael means a nossi, a leader. It's a very specific Kodesh Yisrael, right? But only he does, because he's the Rebbe. So since he is also now a Kodesh Yisrael, so he identifies with his father as a Kodesh Yisrael. The second son, Chaim Avram, he identifies his father as a Goyin HaChassid Morona V'Rabbanon. You know why? Because he was known as a strong Rav, a rabbi. There's a Rebbe and there's a rabbi. He didn't become the Rebbe, right? His older brother became the Rebbe. So what was he? Morona V'Rabbanon. So he sees in his father, the Baal HaTanya, who was a Baal HaShulchan Aruch, who wrote a Shulchan Aruch as a rabbi, Rabbana. So he calls him Morona V'Rabbanon. And finally, the third son, Moshe, he wasn't a rabbi. In other words, he didn't function as a rabbi. He didn't function as a Rebbe. So but he was a Goyin HaChassid. He was a very pious Jew. So he identified his father as a pious Jew. One more change. The Mittler Rebbe and Reb Moshe, the first and third son, they call their fathers Zal, a blessed memory. Zachreina Levracha, Zayin Lamed. Look at the second son, Reb Chaim Avram. He calls his father Zatzal, Zachreinu Tzadik Levracha. Why? And the Rebbe also said, the explanation is, because he was known for his tzidkus, his religiosity. Everyone was religious, but he was kind of super religious. So therefore, one second.
Orthodox.
What? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Ultra-Orthodox. Good. Yes.
But who?
Reb Chaim Avram, amongst the sons of the three sons, the Rebbe says was known in Chabad tradition to have a special tzidkus to him, a special religiosity to him. Therefore, he identifies his father as not only of blessed memory, but of Zachreinu Tzadik V'Levracha, Tzadik meaning of special religiosity as well. And I think that this insight of the Rebbe, which is beautiful, is very profound, because it's when you write where you're at. Where are you holding today? You know, maybe in 10, 15, 20 years, you'll be signing and differently because you are different. Yes, Moshe.
Question: why? I find it interesting that they wrote Zal or Zatzal. We see amongst Hasidim in general, there's usually they would write Schuscho Yogan Aleinu. You see usually more in like the Litvish community, they tend to write Zal, Zatzal.
It's a good point and a good question. I don't know. But it says what it says. Frankly, the Rebbe Rashab is the one who started with this idea, and the Rebbe is the one who took it to the streets in a way of, saying, why are you pushing the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, after his death, passing, why are you pushing him away? So say, Zechusa Yogan Aleinu. May his merit protect us. May his refinement help us. But, that's not, Moshe, that's not conventional, traditional Yiddishkeit, Torah. It's an extra feeling, and the Rebbe had this in him, where he had this particular sense of connection to his father-in-law that went beyond the tradition. So he employed Zayah, Zechusa Yogan Aleinu. But they're writing in the early 1800s, before this was introduced. But you make a very good point. Hillel, you wanted to say something. Hillel.
Yeah, I just wanted to fill in. Who are any other children of the Alter Rebbe?
The Alter Rebbe had daughters, I think. He had a few daughters.
Yeah.
Dvorah
These
Leah.
were his only sons?
These were his only sons. Yes.
And how many daughters did he have?
2 or 3, I forget now.
And I know that some of the daughters married into other Hasidus, made alliances with other Hasidus.
Yes.
Do you remember which ones? One was Chernobyl.
One was Chernobyl and Breslov. But Breslov was Reb Nachman, already a grandson.
A grandson of Reb Nachman.
No, Reb Nachman was 27 years, I think, younger than the Alter Rebbe.
Uh-huh.
His daughter, I think, married Balatanya's Einikul, grandson. And another one was Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchev. Reb Levi Yitzchak's, I forget now, so those are Chernobyl, Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, we don't have really that Hasidus today. And
I learned something interesting today. I don't fully have it in context, but that Reb Nassan, who was the main scribe of all of Rabbi Nachman's teachings, he had originally been a chassid of the Kedushas Levi.
Right.
I didn't know that.
But it makes sense. It makes sense because
Right, it does.
yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. I mean, even in his teaching, I think there's some similarities to the Levi Yitzchak's teaching in his Sefer. Yes, Yonis.
Now, when I was living in Muncie many years ago, there was a particular shul. But they used to say Piyutim. Oh, they used to say long Piyutim.
Okay, so maybe there is a prediction of a Rebbe, but I know that for 200 years, I don't think there was a prediction of a Rebbe. There was Chernobyl and Breslov, and all that. Yes, Moshe.
Just to review, we spoke about this before, but just to review, is there any shul today in the world, Chabad shul, that would be somehow sure to, somehow connected to one of the other sons of the Tzemach Tzedek?
None.
And
Let me just say, there's a gentleman in Baltimore, Sharvik, maybe Hillel knows him. Sharvik,
Say the name again?
Sharvik, who
Shavrik. You know a Shavrik.
Shavrik, yeah.
I know him very well. Yeah.
So he's been releasing Maimorim of some of the other sons of the Tzemach Tzedek. So either his family, I wouldn't be surprised, came from one of the other sons, and somehow he has manuscripts. But I asked, he didn't make his own shul, and doesn't believe that there is today an active Hasidus of those sons. So the answer is, as far as I know, there isn't. But again, one second, there are plenty of people, and I bump into them always, both Litvische people and Hasidic people, that come from the son. They were Hasidim of the other sons of the Tzemach Tzedek. That there is. But if you're asking one second, but Moshe, if you're asking if there's a shul, as far as I know, there isn't. Yes, Hillel, what?
So I learned the Sefer Magen Avot from the Rebbe of Kapas.
Yes.
With Rabbi Shavrik, yeah.
Yeah.
At one point.
Yeah. So.
And no, but I do not believe he had an ancestor who was an early Chabad connected with Rabbi Axelrod in Baltimore. And in fact, he told a wonderful story that this ancestor, who was a shochet, and he used to serve a lot of the communities, like going west from Baltimore. So what he would do is he would ride the train going west, and everybody would bring their animals to the train stop. When he'd have a stopover, he would check the animals and then go on. It was just a great story of the period piece. Also, wasn't there a group? We've talked about it. I don't remember what they were called. They were in the Bronx.
Oh, that's the Malachim. The Malachim.
Okay,
Yeah, but the Malachim stopped with the Tzemach Tzedek. The Malach, his, like, you know, he felt that the Chabad, authentic Chabad, should have stopped with the Tzemach Tzedek, not even with his sons. Yeah, but that's a whole other conversation. By the way, Rabbi Axelrod was a complete Chabad Lubavitch chassid, Lubavitch. So, you know, what I'm saying is the Magen Avos was a sefer of the Kapister Rebbe, one of the sons, actual grandsons of the Tzemach Tzedek, because the father passed away 6 months after the Tzemach Tzedek passed away. And his name was Rav Shlomo Zalman, right? The Baal Magen Avos. And he had the largest Chabad group of everyone. And there's a lot to discuss. It's in my book, Volume 2, Chabad Portraits. A lot of details. And but it finished, because when his third son passed away, Rav Shmaryo Noach of Babruisk, Rav Shmaryo Noach Schneerson, who lived in Babruisk, he passed away in 1923. His son and his son-in-law did not want to be a Rebbe. And I just heard this past Shabbos from a Jew who knew his son in England. He moved from Eretz Yisrael, people don't know, to England. He lived like a nomad when everyone left the Jewish neighborhood at the East End in London. He lived there, and someone brought him food and supported him. And the Rebbe made sure that he had a prominent burial in a Chosheva section in one of the cemeteries there. And the Rebbe demanded that they write that he came. He's called a Banshak. Banshak means Benon Shel Kedoshim, a son of the holy ones. And the Rebbe, this person told me, his father, Rabbi Rappaport was his name, was the Rosh Dayan in London, the head of the Bezdin. And the Rebbe got on the phone. Rabbi Chadakov, his secretary, called, and he said, please make sure to put the appropriate title on the Matzeva. Even though the Rebbe said there are fools who didn't treat him appropriately when he came to England. I don't know why. There must be a story. But he was a son, and he didn't want to be Rebbe. So basically, the dynasty of Kopust ended. It ended. Once it ended, they started to come back to the Rashab and the previous Rebbe. And that's why in 1951, there's a sikha, the Rebbe said they were fighting in Manchester. There was an old Kopester shul from the time when there was a Kopester Rebbe. And they were fighting. And it was not nice. Vicious fights. Okay? I mean, you're talking about, the shtetl fights. Now, in Manchester, and the Rebbe said, what are you fighting for? Everyone has come back and become Hasidim of the previous Rebbe. So if you learn the Kopester Torah Magen Avos, great. But there's no Kopester Rebbe anymore, so what are you fighting about? But, if you have it in your blood, and it was at the time, it was a very, very, you could say a very nasty disagreement, unfortunately. Yes, you understand.
Now, when that rabbi's looking in the crown, he belongs to the Malachim, right?
No, in fact, I discussed that also with some of his grandkids just a few weeks ago. Not exactly. He identified with wearing the long garments and things like that, but I don't believe he was an official malach.
Who is the question about?
There's a family in Chabad called Zirkind. Zirkind. One of them actually lives, Yaakov Zirkind. He's a sofer in Baltimore. You must know him, Hillel. Yaakov Zirkind. So he's a son.
I don't recall.
You don't recall. He's a son from the one Yonis is speaking about, Eliezer Zirkind, who was the Rebbe Sefer, and he also made Rabbeinu Tam's film for Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. So he would shecht his own cows, make his own wine. I mean, you know, he didn't trust anybody, and he was a big Talmud Chacham and a Sefer. And he put on, as a young man, you know, the long garb and a hat up. And so many people think that he was a malach. I don't think he was, but he related to that. Okay, enough history this morning. Moshe is quellig. You know, it's Baruch Hashem. Anyway, we learned the approbation, and so tomorrow we'll start the introduction. Have a great day. Encourage other people to either see it on YouTube or come and join us. Shalom. Sei gesund. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Great day. Take care.